My own view, to get to the heart of your question, how do we know? The case for Christianity is a standard of evidence. It is saying if we will show that we have all this evidence, and by doing that, a skeptic should become Christian. That this is enough to prove that Christ really did rise from the dead, etc. If that's the standard that Christians are promoting, to me, that's a perfectly fine standard to then apply to the other books.
Quick break to tell you about Relief Band. It's an absolute game changer if you have nausea, like I did when I was pregnant, or so many people suffer from when they have chemotherapy, cancer, or motion sickness. Whatever you have that makes you nauseous, Relief Band is an absolute game changer because it's been FDA approved. It's the only one that's used in hospitals by oncologists, and it doesn't interact with any medications. And it's safe and effective, non-drowsy, will not make you drowsy, and there's no side effects. When you have chemotherapy, the last thing you want is another medication to take. Or if you're pregnant, you don't want to have anything. I don't like to put extra stuff in my body. How it works is it's a band that puts a pulse into your wrist and it sends a message up to your brain and into your stomach to stop being nauseous. And it works very fast, even before the symptoms appear sometimes. So if you want to cure your nausea fast, join the hundreds of thousands of other people who are nausea-free with Relief Band. Right now, they have an exclusive offer for listeners of my show, Business Game Changers. If you go to reliefband.com and use the promo code Sarah, you'll receive 20% off plus free shipping. So go to reliefband, reliefband.com, and use the promo code Sarah to save 20% off and free shipping. Welcome to Business Game Changers. I'm Sarah Westall. I have Matthew McWhorter coming to the program. He wrote a book called Canon Crossfire, and he is an attorney, or a retired attorney, and he was also an atheist, and he wanted to investigate the Bible and other books of the Bible that's not included in the scripture to make a case of whether Jesus existed or Christianity was legit or not. And in that process, he came to become a believer. But the whole point of this isn't whether he's a believer or not. The whole point is to talk about his process and the evidence he looked at and how he went about doing it. And it's a great parallel discussion on how you pretty much go about anything in life, trying to figure out what the truth is and having an open mind but critical, looking at the evidence and applying it to whatever truth that you're going after. This was a beautiful conversation, and I welcome whether you're an atheist or you're a believer or you're religious or spiritual or whatever you are. I think that you'll enjoy this conversation because I think it hits every one of us in a different way, and it can be so practical. This application can be so practical for everything that we're dealing with now. I mean, the fact that we have so much turmoil and division, and it can be a really good start on how to heal that divide and start to bring down these walls. Not necessarily what your conclusion is on this, but the process that he used was so helpful for so many things. And I want you to comment. I want you to share this. I want you to let me know your thoughts. Let's have a dialogue about this. And if you are interested in getting his book, I'll have the link below, but you can go to canoncrossfire.com. It's CANON crossfire.com, and you can find it there. And he created something new. I guess there hasn't been anything in history done what he did, just bringing all the evidence together, what people were saying about different scriptures early on for the first 400 years, what the Jewish people themselves said, not what the Christians said the Jewish people said, but what they said. It is a collection of material that has never been put together before. And it is getting a really good reviews from the entire spectrum. So again, canoncrossfire.com, and I'll have the link below. And before we get into that, I also want to tell you on Substack, I'll have a preview of his book along with where to watch the show, which you're watching it now. But you can go and look at the preview, but you can share it with others so they can get a copy of the preview and also watch this show as well. So I have a link to that below as well. And if you're listening to this on any platform, especially Apple, I'm trying to build up my ratings on Apple. Right now, I've been in the top 20 on Business News for like 8 years. They're the only platform that hasn't deleted me, hasn't canceled me. And so I'm trying to now, there's increased competition and people within the last 5 years realize how important this market is. So all the big players are putting money into it. And the Business News is one of the areas that people really take seriously. And I want to keep my standings in that area because it's worth something to me, and being canceled off everywhere else, I want to maintain that. It's the one kind of gem I have. And so I really, really appreciate if you could rate it and give me a ranking, a 5. Don't give me, my husband gave me a 4 because he didn't realize it was out of 5 when I first started. And it was so bad back then because there was only 3 people that rated me, my husband, my dad, and I think my mom. And so out of 3 people, I had 2 5s and a 4. I'm like, why'd you give me a 4? He goes, well, I thought that was the top ranking. So I'm still working my way out of that hole. So if you can give me a 5 and also give me a review, I'd really appreciate it because those mean a lot on that platform. And also share. Okay, let's get into this. I really enjoyed this conversation with Matthew McWhorter. Hi, Matthew. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. God bless.
You have an interesting background. You're an attorney, and you you were an atheist, and then you decided you were going to go on this quest to understand the missing books of the Bible and redefine. And it ended up redefining I'm putting words in your mouth. I want you to say it on your understanding of our history and spirituality and so forth. Can you talk a little bit about your background and then what got you to look into, go on this project that you...
Yeah. Oddly enough, it involved my mother from the very beginning. She named me Matthew Mark. So that is the key, is I was actually named after the Bible, but I wasn't really raised religious. We didn't pray to read the Bible, go to church. I didn't understand much about religion. But I had massive medical problems late in or midlife, but I would say late in my life, but only because I'm still here. But in my 40s, I had a heart attack and cancer.
Wow.
And survived them both. I'm doing fine, but as it was very scary. I'm very lucky to be alive, and as a result, as I was recovering, people said, "Well, what's on your bucket list in case the end does come here soon?" And honestly, it was a list of books I hadn't read. And on the list was Matthew and Mark, and I never read them.
Okay.
So the oddity of my circumstance was I was not recruited by a Christian or a church. There was no person involved and no group involved. It was just I went on Amazon and bought a box of books. Um, there's a Catholic Bible, a Protestant Bible, and Orthodox Bibles, for example. They have different books in them. There are different translations of the Bible.
Well, there's many Bibles, right? I mean, there's like 180, 88 or something different, maybe more different
translations. Yeah. And then even if you have the same translation, the different denominations and different scholars will write different commentaries on the Bible. So I bought over 100 commentaries on the Bible to help me understand what every sentence was really saying, etc. And I basically would read. So I started, my name being Matthew, I start with the Gospels, and I read like chapter 1 of Matthew across 100 Bible commentaries and different translations and different denominations to, fully understand Matthew chapter 1. Then I would move on to chapter 2. So
well,
it was
in the before I want you to say what you're going to say, but in the translations, how many different translations is there a huge range of what they interpret it to be?
Not terribly bad. Like 90% of it is close enough that it's different, but it's you're still getting the gist of it, you're getting across it, etc. There are, however, some very strange translations out there. And again, because I just bought books, I would later find out that a couple of things I bought are basically cult books.
Yeah,
But I
there's
didn't
religious cults, right? I mean,
exactly, and I
and they're
didn't
very
know
active in politics and everywhere.
exactly. And there was one here I'm in Columbus, Ohio. So there was one in Columbus, Ohio, and I would find their books everywhere in every bookstore because people had dumped them when they left the cult. But then that meant that I picked them up years later and I'm reading about, this cult from years ago. And I'm like, oh, well, that explains why this translation's so strange, you know?
For
But
example, like what would be in a translation that was strange?
some of them
Or
are more like paraphrases or um, so instead of giving you the quotes in the word for word type of translation, they would just summarize the thing in whatever way they wanted with leaving certain things out or changing it. So you'd find all sorts of strange things. John chapter 6 is an interesting one if you're a Protestant, because a certain kind of Protestant anyway, because that's the chapter where Jesus says, I am the bread, I am the wine. And so then the question is, well, what did he mean? Was that an allegory? What did he mean it literally, etc.? And you will find translations that just say flat out, this is an allegory or whatever. And it's like, that's not what the word said in Greek. That's what somebody's interpreted, and they're pretending almost as if that's it. So some of the translation problem that I would run into is sort of a shortcut that rather than explain it to somebody, rather than argue over it, they would just dictate the answer to any of their readers, right? And
okay,
it's sort of it's that kind of thing where it's manipulative, right? It's not telling you what the
it's
actual
very,
text said. It's
yeah.
telling you what the guy thinks of the text.
It's very manipulative. Okay, but here's the deal. You decided there were other books as well that were out there because
Well, I didn't
I'm
decide that. I discovered.
no discovered.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the wrong way to say that. You
Yeah.
discovered it. You're just seeking the truth, right?
Yeah.
And I have a hard time. I'm spiritual, but I don't consider myself religious.
Mm.
I grew up in a Christian environment, but I like to I'm looking for the truth, which is what I think Jesus was all about. And that means the truth brings you wherever. I'm not 100% convinced that the Bible isn't manipulated from the beginning. How did how did you get to the point where you trust what's in any of this?
So it's a basically an evidentiary review, which is right up my alley as a retired lawyer. Was you're looking for corroborating evidence that shows you that these are the authentic texts from the very beginning.
Hmm.
And the case for that is it's generally called the case for Christ or the case for Christianity. And there's fabulous books that give you a lot of evidence on that topic. However, the people who wrote those books sort of assume the modern Protestant Bible as the baseline and as given,
That's right. Yeah.
and they're not quite looking at these other books. So what happened to me when I was doing this, again, just the oddity, I was not being brought in by a church or a person. I didn't care which of these Bibles was, the official Christian Bible. I didn't even necessarily believe that whatever the official Christian Bible was true. But what I was doing was I was reviewing this case for Christ, the evidence for Christianity, and simultaneously looking into this question of what Bible am I supposed to be reading? And it was looking at those two questions at the exact same time that let me see a problem that occurs in this case for Christ, where you have the Christian saying, come to Jesus, everybody, all you skeptics, come to Jesus because we have all this evidence that corroborates these as the true gospels. And over here, they're saying, well, don't pay any attention to those extra books because the evidence for them is terrible. And I'm reading them and saying, guys, it's the same evidence.
Yes.
What are we
Yes.
doing here? And that is the point that I'm making in the book. So the book's called Canon Crossfire. Does the Protestant Bible blow up the case for Christianity? The blowing up portion is me saying, guys, do you realize this is the same thing? You're criticizing the evidence that you're using over here to prove Christianity. You're criticizing it in this other debate, the canon debate over what should be in the Bible. That is kind of inarguable. It's easily shown, and whatever the answer is, it's going to be a different explanation or a different story that's going to come out of that. But it has to start with a recognition that it's the same evidence. The second thing that occurred was because I was doing this again, I'm reviewing these two questions at the same time. I'm trying to reach an answer. I, I just wanted to know, what did all the Christians of the early church ever say about these books? So And I
Well, that's
discovered
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, I
Okay.
went all over trying to find it. What happens is you find these books, you'll find a Catholic book that says, well, there were these 10 fathers who said this, and you'll find this Protestant book that says there were these 12 fathers who said this, and et cetera. And guys, I want to know what everybody ever said. And that's what a judge would say. If you told me, let's take a father, Athanasius, if you say Athanasius said this, well, how do I know that that's true? Well, I would ask just some basic questions. If you're a judge in a trial, you would say, well, is that the only thing he ever said? Was he consistent throughout his life? Did he say this at the beginning of his life, at the end of his life? What did his peers say? What did his predecessors in Alexandria say? What did his successors in Alexandria say? These things would confirm that he's telling the truth or show us that he's not telling the truth. I want to know all that. And the problem was there was no effort to collect all of these things that had ever been said and assemble them for somebody to read. I looked all over for that. It doesn't exist. It would have been very hard before the internet era to create it. But because it is the internet era, it could be done. It just took a lot of work. It took me years basically to assemble all of
Wow.
that. It is now possible through my book. You can read what everyone said in the first 450 years of Christianity about these books. That is the new foundation of evidence for everybody to then argue whatever they want from that point. And I'm making
Wow.
my point, et cetera.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
everybody's got to start with the evidence. That's the evidence. And it's just assembled now in a convenient, user-friendly fashion. Before it took a ton of work. And basically, everybody was talking about these topics without having done that work. And now it's been done.
Oh,
So,
fantastic. And you're
yeah,
doing it from an investigative standpoint as an
exactly.
attorney working a case, which is as objective as you can possibly be, because that's important. Is if we're really going
Absolutely.
to try to, yeah,
And it's my life skill. It's not
yeah,
like it's not like I'm an amateur at sorting through evidence and assembling it and making sure we get on all of it, et cetera. That is exactly what I would do. And this book is basically that. It is the assemblage that a lawyer would make of all of this stuff, explained to somebody in the shortest, simplest way we can. If I were your lawyer in a giant lawsuit and we had rooms
yeah.
full of documents, you would be wanting me to write you a summary that got you up to speed on all of it. Well, that's what I did. So,
Wow. Okay. So then how do you determine whether the book itself is because we know we have all these books in modern history of just of people writing stuff. Some of
yeah,
it's really good and other stuff isn't, and some is a combination. I mean, how do
absolutely.
we know that any part is actually authentic or good? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And it comes down, the first thing is you need a standard of proof, and then you should be consistent with that standard of proof, whatever it is. And that is the conflict that I'm talking about with this crossfire is it seems so far that the Protestant books that I was reading in particular have an inconsistent standard. They say, well, look at all of our evidence over here for the Gospels, but then ignore this exact same evidence over here. That can't continue, right? That doesn't work. So that element of a consistent standard, will basically determine the answer. But the question is, what is the standard? I mean, it's entirely possible for someone to look at this and say, I reject all the books. It is, I'm that my book deals with what are called the Catholic Apocrypha. So it's a particular set of books that the Catholics accept. And I'm showing the evidence for them. I would say that a consistent standard of evidence would accept those books. You don't have to agree with me, but that's my view. I'm not sure what other consistent standards there would be to divide these things. I can sort of see a way to see a couple of these books being included, but not others, et cetera. But it's got to be something that somebody establishes that's a consistent standard. My own view, to get to the heart of your question, how do we know? The case for Christianity is a standard of evidence. It is saying if we will show that we have all this evidence, and by doing that, a skeptic should become Christian. That this is enough to prove that Christ really did rise from the dead, etc. If that's the standard that Christians are promoting, to me, that's a perfectly fine standard to then apply to the other books. And that's the
Interesting.
point that I'm making. But again, how people sort their way through all of this, I leave that to the reader. But, whatever it is, you got to be honest about it. And part of honesty is being consistent and judging, things fairly.
Well, and no matter what you're looking at, if you just make assumptions and you don't actually seek the truth, then you'll just be living in a delusion, no matter what, even
Exactly.
something as sacred as your spiritual beliefs.
And that is a point that, again, all of these books trying to prove Christianity make is as a skeptic, well, you should be open-minded. You should be not just judge things based on your own presupposition that, the dead, Jesus couldn't be risen from the dead, etc. Um, Fair enough. But then you have to do the same on your own, when your own beliefs, you're trying to prove your own beliefs, such as what is the true and correct Bible. You shouldn't be judging from a presupposition. You should be looking at the evidence.
Well, interesting. When I was growing up, we had family priests, and my family was pretty religious. In the Episcopal Church, my mom's a
Mhm.
Eucharistic minister, and
Mhm.
I mean, so we were, and I had to acolyte every other weekend, so I was always there.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is that the family priests we had, because they had the church priest, but then they had a family priest too, where they would do study and things, and they didn't use the books of the Bible that much. They went
Mm.
outside and looked at other scriptures and other things that were written. I mean, that's
Yeah.
what they did, which was kind of something I remember growing up is they just looked at things differently.
Yeah. So one of the things that's happened when I've gone out and talked to people about my book and convinced people to read them, they are fascinated by these stories, what's actually in the books. As I say, they're called the Catholic Apocrypha, the Catholic Deuterocanon. These particular books, they'll tell a story of, say, Susanna or Judith or Tobit. Um, I've been amazed how interested Protestants who had not been exposed to those books have become because they start to see the connections between that book and what they're reading in their own New Testament scriptures. Throughout these Bible commentaries, as I say, I had over 100 of them, Protestant Bible commentaries. I pulled out all the times that those commentaries tell me that the New Testament is referring to one of these books. And so I'm showing people that connection, and that is an element of their scriptures that if they've not really thought about it, they didn't recognize where things came from and how it all relates. But it is fairly clear. Again, you got to be a consistent, honest standard. But if you claim that Jesus Christ was foretold in the Old Testament, I mean, he's not mentioned by name. He's alluded to by the Old Testament. You have to apply the same thing, when these books of the New Testament were alluding back to these books, it's fairly clear and provable that the New Testament is referring to these extra books. And that element of how that should, whether you consider them scripture or not is a separate question, but that there's something being said and a message that's being conveyed in the original document that you might not understand correctly if you didn't realize that he's actually alluding to this other work. It's a mind-changing, thought-changing process to realize how those interconnections apply and how that works.
Well, it's like
And
a legal case. If you are referring to something in a legal case, it can completely change the entire case, that
absolutely.
extra document.
And, it's even jokes about The Simpsons or references from Shakespeare or whatever. I mean, in our own culture, any of those things add an element of understanding that you're lacking if you didn't get the joke, right? Or if you didn't recognize that that came from Shakespeare or what is the guy really referring to when he said those words? And anyway, it's been interesting to me how excited Protestants have been to read the stories and see that stuff and develop a better understanding of their own scriptures.
Well, and I think the more I understand, this is why I call myself spiritual and not
Hmm.
religious, is because the more I understand the world and science and just how frequency works and everything else, I start to see all of that in a different light, and that they were and I also like to look at just what Jesus said, not necessarily everybody's interpretation on what Jesus was.
Yep.
And because that gives you a different look at really what's going on as well. So that for me, it's a lifelong quest,
Yep.
and I don't like the fact that people read this stuff and then turn off their brain and then read it literally.
Yeah.
And so that to me is probably the literal translation and the literal behavior and then being very judgmental to others based on your literal view of it without understanding context turns me off to religion, being honest, because I think they
Yeah.
miss the whole point of what this is all about. And so I'm trying to find the nut of what it's about. And I think that the fact that you went outside the boundaries to learn about this is what's so intriguing to me.
Yeah, it's funny because what you're describing is somewhat the opposite of what my thought. You want when I want to get back to what Jesus said, I read 100 people's view
Yeah, yeah.
in order to sort of surround that nut and get back to the core element, right? And then the second thing I would say is just my entire background is interpreting contracts and fighting with lawyers over how to interpret a contract, et cetera. The idea that there is only one way to read something is so contrary to everything I have ever learned or dealt with. And the when I read a lot of Bible scholarship, and isn't just the fundamentalists, the literal interpretation,
Mhm.
you'll get the exact same thing from skeptics, the skeptical scholars writing things. Well, this sentence says this, therefore that. Like, dude, if you're not able to interpret that sentence three different ways, you just need a better lawyer. Like, go hire somebody to help you interpret things. Like, there are multiple interpretations of everything.
That's
And
right.
so the proofs that people try, and like you said, you can see that on the fundamental side. I saw it throughout when I was doing this case for Christ, but people will say, to give it one example, Pilate's robe, I think it is, that is described in two different colors. One is red and one is purple, I think, in two different gospels, et cetera. And you'll find these skeptical opponents saying, well, that's an inconsistency that shows that the two people aren't there. Like, have you ever sat around listening to two women discuss a third woman's outfit and debating what the color is? I mean, like, this is a normal human conversation, a normal human discrepancy that would occur, and yet you find these people saying the only way to interpret that is as an inconsistency that disproves both of the accounts. Like, that's crazy. And seeing some of that in the allegedly skeptical criticisms of the Bible was actually, to me, kind of an eye-opening experience of how shallow some of that criticism really is, because it is based on just one interpretation of a sentence, and that makes no sense.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
think the best conversation I had growing up was with this priest who left the Catholic Church and it was kind of non-denominational. I was in college and I just happened to be at some place and he was there and we ended up having a couple-hour conversation about the church and things. And I still remember it to this day because he talked about how the problem with the Bible and with religion is, and with written word, is that there's, and I'm going to try to articulate the way he did because I'm not going to do as good a job, is that the Bible is, it's difficult with written word to share and show people what the true meaning is. And he said that's the reason Jesus never wrote it down, anything down, is because he wanted to show it by how he behaved, just lived it and showed people through living and experience. And then people tried to describe that in written word, which is almost impossible to do. And it's almost impossible to interpret it and understand it, based on our human limitations. And that's why he lived it to show it. And that was profound for me when he told me that. Just a short break from the program to share with you an amazing peptide to help you lose weight. It's stronger than Ozempic. And why? It's because it not only reduces your appetite, but it also burns fat. These other GLP-1s on the market, they do not burn fat. They just reduce your appetite. This one, retatrutide, is stronger. It's considered a next generation peptide because of that. And man, does this work. I've been using it for 2.5 weeks and I've already lost 11 pounds, and I cut my dose in half because I was losing weight too quickly. And that kind of freaked me out, to be honest. And so I also am taking this 5-amino 1MQ in capsule form. This helps by making sure that you lose fat, not muscle. And so in conjunction, I'm using both of these. This will work whether you have this or not. And I am telling you, it's amazing. If you are interested in getting this, I have the link below, or you can go to sarahwestall.com under shop. You can use the coupon code Sarah to save 10%. If you have questions about your own use, you should either consult your doctor or you can join Dr. Diane's tribe. And I have a link below to that. It is only $1 for the first week. You can ask her any question you want and get all your answers to this, how to take an injectable. And there shouldn't be any fear in doing that. It is easy and straightforward. Go to sarahwestall.com under shop or use the link below, and remember to use coupon code Sarah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the concept of Jesus as the Word of God, right? That it's not the word written down, it's the person as the word, that we find in John's gospel. And like you said, to me, the fact that there's four gospels and I can read four different views of Jesus, the fact that there's all these different commentaries it was part of trying to get to the real person. Because if I wanted to know about you personally, I'm sure I could ask, your neighbor and I'd get one view of you. I could ask, your
I'm sure you
family
could
and
get
I get a
all
different
sorts
view.
of views of me.
Well, exactly. And who's the real person? The answer is
Yeah.
it's none of these descriptions, right?
Yeah.
It's a piece of all of them. Everybody's got a little bit of it, but the whole thing's got to be brought together. And anyway, that was a part of my journey was, again, I started out, I knew so little about religion and Christianity, et cetera, but like to find out that the Gospels were four different accounts to a lawyer, that is actually comforting because we know what eyewitness testimony looks like, and it's kind of a mess and it contradicts itself, et cetera, because that's how human beings are. So when we see the little discrepancies between John's gospel and Mark's gospel, that doesn't bother us as a sign that the either of them's not true. I mean, it doesn't prove that it's true either. That's another step. But that initial, well, gee, I got two different versions of the same story. Like, my God, every family reunion I've ever been at involves one half of my family screaming at the other half of my family because they can't remember the historical event they're screaming about in quite the same way. Like, I mean, that's just normal stuff that happens when two people see the same thing. They see different things because it's got filtered through their own eyes.
That's right. And that's the difficulty when it gets back to that conversation of just the written word itself and human beings and our ability to even comprehend without experiencing it.
Yep,
Right?
absolutely. And people will. My journey to Christianity was very intellectual because I'm a intellectual book reader type person. So I don't have the sort of psychological, emotional epiphany, et cetera, type story. That's not really how it is. But I did have the growing awareness that what I was reading has a deeper meaning and an experiential component to it of it, realizing that the Bible is explaining the world in a way that I think is better than all the other descriptions I've had for, I read plenty of science, philosophy, psychology, etc. But things that I read in the Bible gave me a better understanding of why our world is so broken, why people have the struggles that they have, etc., than I felt that I was getting in those other elements. And it's a combination of sort of the evidence for Christianity plus all of that coalesces into one view, right? If I didn't find the evidence, Christianity could have been a wonderful story. If I didn't find the evidence, I wouldn't believe it. But at the same time, the evidence isn't enough. Like that just sort of opens the door to this philosophical worldview change that comes with Christian beliefs.
Well, I have a friend who grew up in a monastery and
Mm.
she knows 9 different languages. And she tells me that understanding things in different languages is really important because what
Yeah.
we see just in English is just a snapshot, just a slice of what
Yep.
is really out there. So what
Yeah.
you
And I,
did, yeah. So now I'm bringing a whole nother dimension to this.
yeah. And I often, when I was reading these commentaries and stuff, I kind of wish we would just go back. Like, this is the Bible in Greek. Let's all just learn some basic Greek so we can follow that. And then all of this discussion would be about the interpretation. Instead, what it looks like when you're reading an English language Bible is that's the real words that the guy said 2,000 years ago. And then we discuss it like that. Those are not the real words the guy said. Those are the English words. And as we were talking before, they can be manipulatively translated by somebody with an agenda trying to show you something. It's freaky. Just
Well,
seeing how all that gets discussed and debated and presented.
well, and then there's books in other languages that haven't even been translated.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
A
And
lot
so
of
I
them.
was, yeah, and so some of my, what I did is collect the scholarship of people who know how to read Greek, right? So I'm pulling together what they are giving me. So I was looking at different translations whenever I could, but for other books, I was looking at a translation that wasn't available 30 years ago. Like it had only recently been translated into English, et cetera. So it was interesting how, every year in 1840 and in 1940 and 2040, people will write a book about the Bible and what it means. But like we have more information with
Yes.
each one of those. And it's interesting to see the gaps and the way that people, you were saying before about judgmental interpretations, et cetera, but you would also see judgmental things about the science or the history or what everyone had
On
said.
anything. Yeah.
Exactly, but you would, in this context, you will find a shockingly conclusive answer given to people when the science didn't hold up, right? So like you're looking at something from 1930 and somebody's commenting on the Bible or, whatever, Genesis and the Egyptians and this and that. Well, like 30 years later, we found something in a hole in the desert and now we know differently. But people are making very conclusive opinions in 1930, um, as if the science was fully known, as if the history was fully established and we knew everything at that
That's
time. Like
right.
we don't know even all of that stuff.
That's right. And that's kind of where I'm at. That's why I say I'm spiritual and not religious, because I see too many assumptions and judgmental behaviors based on an incomplete data set, if you
Yeah.
will, and not thinking broader enough. I can't tell you how many people who are very Christian who believe that the Bible is the only written word that's worth looking at. And I just growing up and I knowing, and like you were saying, that it's Bible's referring to all these other things.
Yeah.
Just having that viewpoint to me seems closed-minded, and I think that's the anti behavior that was taught. I mean, truth is much broader than that, and you have to be much more open-minded and critically thinking to have that kind of a stance on something, right? That's my
Yeah, and I've only recently entered the online world, right? So I'm on Twitter now with the book, et cetera, and you get some odd comments from people or stuff, but it's they can be judgmental without even having read the whole Bible, apparently, or not remembering the whole Bible, but they'll quote one thing. It's like, well, the Bible said the opposite right over here.
That's
Um,
right.
that sort of thing can be kind of shocking. And I would say, I don't know, our whole culture, it's not Christians, it's not a complaint about religious people, et cetera, but our whole culture at this point involves people making claims without the slightest
That's right.
supporting evidence, without Googling anything. They're told something they like, and that's it. They don't Google it. They don't
Well,
spend
Google
five
isn't even
seconds.
something to trust right now,
Well,
right?
exactly, but at
Because
least it's
they
a
only prop up the top paying
no,
people.
totally, but it's at least a start.
I
Like,
agree.
like it's
I
at least a,
agree.
something you can do in 5 seconds and just say, "Oh, well, that's stupid," or whatever. Like it's something. And what we find in our society is people don't do anything, and that's I don't know. I find it
Well, that's
crazy.
why I have whittled it down to a basic thing. Jesus was about, I've come to this thing because I think if you could look at everything through this lens, Jesus was about how do you maximize everyone flourishing? And you start with yourself and your family first. And you just operate that way because that is love. That is society being the best it can be. We all have all sorts of different interpretations and meanings and how you go about doing that and what works best. But I think it all kind of boils down to that nut. And that's kind of what I've come to the conclusion of. And that's how I live my life. And then being completely open-minded on trying and critically thinking at the same time, trying to figure out what the truth is on everything. And not being
Yeah,
afraid to ask the
yeah,
questions. Being fearful to ask a question about anything is actually really oppressive and suppression. You're oppressing
yeah.
people if you're afraid to ask the question. Questions aren't harmful. It's the suppressing the answers that's harmful.
Exactly. And that's, as I say, that's the spirit of the entire case for Christ. It is what we ask of everybody else in the world. We feel that we can prove it if everyone's open-minded and willing to ask questions and willing to consider things. It is kind of shocking, though, as you say, sometimes you encounter people who, once they've made their decision, they close their mind back down and are not willing to open up their minds, etc. That it, that's not really what the Bible's about. That's not what, as I say, the case for Christ is about, and it's not how we should live.
Well, I think it's opposite of what that was teaching because in every field, like medicine, for example, they believe a paradigm and then they close it down, and then actually they create a lot of harm that way because they're not looking at better new ways of thinking about things that could save a lot of lives or make things much better for everyone. And I mean, that's just one field. It happens in every field. That's why
Sure.
advancements come from outside the field because you look at things from a fresh paradigm and you're able to see things differently. And so I think that is the essence of seeking for truth, seeking for understanding. And I think that's one of the main messages behind all this, right? And there's a reason for it because it gets back to the nut. That's maximizing everybody flourishing.
Yeah, and to be honest, that's exactly what my book is. I'm not a scholar, don't pretend to be a scholar. All I did was read what the scholars wrote and say, guys, this is a conflict, and start assembling all this stuff for them to look at. Like, this is a book for people who understand Christianity and all these arguments to use. But in order to do that, I had to be an outsider. I had to read their stuff.
That's
And,
right.
I'm the one with the skills of, remembering what I read 4 weeks ago and putting them together, et cetera. That comes from a lifetime as a lawyer of sorting through evidence and finding connections and disconnects, et cetera. And I hope scholars will look at my book and say, well, that's an improvement on the scholarship, but I am an outsider. So I'm trying to get the word out and try to work on it. But that is exactly what I hope is occurring here, that a fresh set of eyes with a different skill set can point something out that everybody can see and now build off of that.
You're not going in with a bias. And that to me
Exactly.
is what's so refreshing and interesting about your situation
Yeah.
is you're going in, well, you might have had a bias. You went in with a bias like I'm going to be critical of everything because I don't believe
Believe
anything.
it.
Yeah, I
Exactly.
don't believe it. So I'm going to be
Yeah.
critical of everything. And that's your bias, which is to me that's not necessarily a bad bias, but it's a bad bias if it shuts down your ability to question, right?
Exactly.
So if you didn't
And
allow that to happen, then it's wonderful.
lawyers have a little bit of an advantage in that we argue both sides of every case, and you're always open-minded to what the judge is going to rule, which might not be what you rule.
It
So like
forces you to be because you're like, dang
exactly.
it, I got to deal with this a-hole. Yeah.
Exactly. There's certain structural things that sort of maybe give you a little bit of advantage of being slightly more open-minded than others, but it's a basic human failing. We all run into that. The key is just we got to judge things fairly and consistently, and you force yourself to do it. And if you force yourself to do it, it's an eye-opening experience in some cases.
Now, the other thing I got to ask you is how much of this process, I mean, you had a spiritual journey
Mm.
essentially writing this. This
Yeah.
I think you would agree. But
Oh yeah.
how much of it is you wanting there to be this to be true versus, I mean, because a lot of us just
Yeah.
want it to, it feels better for it to be true.
And that's the conversation I've had with so many people, but it's just not who I am. I don't know how to describe it, but it's like I, to me, they're like, well, you went through a near-death experience, you this, that. Like, I didn't care. Like we all die sometime. I like it, just turn the page, whatever. And well, what did you think would happen to you? Like, I assumed I would disappear, that you die and it's all over. Like, and I still didn't care. I don't, and I don't know. I'm an odd person, but it was not all of that sort of emotional drive to it. Instead, that came later. It came as I was reading the Bible and like, wait a minute, there might be more out there. There might be more meaning here. There might be more. That was sort of a discovery, much more than a compulsion that I started with.
Well,
Um,
for me, the science, because I'm a science person,
hmm,
And I also grew up in this, I kind of am a weird duck too, I think. And the more I dive into advanced science and physics and things, the more that actually explains Christian or spirituality. Like I've interviewed Sherry Edwards, who can hear hundreds of times better than an average person, and she tells me at the moment of death and the moment of life, there's a light that goes into us. She hears like a matrix. It's really an interesting. You got to listen to her story, and she's been studied by multiple military labs, and she's an amazing person. But she says at the moment of life and the moment of death, there's a light, or there's something that goes in and out of us. And it's a frequency, or it's a life force or something that starts to explain that, Jesus was risen. I mean,
Yeah.
there's so many things that you can, as you start to investigate more, that you can start explaining this. And I think that spirituality, they say science and religion is totally separate things. I don't think so. I also
Exactly.
don't think science is not spiritual. I think science is only what we understand at any one moment in time, and we might not be smart enough to
Yeah, I
actually understand everything.
and that's exactly the experience I had from reading the Bible and getting into this stuff, et cetera. Is like you sort of assume that science is enough to explain it because you hear this all the time, and I was a science fiction reader, et cetera.
Yeah.
That's most science fiction authors are anti-religious, et cetera. You pick up that stuff in our culture, and then all of a sudden you start looking at other things. It's like, well, wait a minute, this doesn't explain any, it explains a piece of the universe, but not the universe,
That's right.
etc. And even just basic, as I was saying earlier, basic history has changed so much. We find things in the desert, that are different. And so I have started, it's just an odd little collection I have, but it's all the books in which there was a fight between science and religion, with the scientists saying, you're so stupid, this is the facts, in which the science was wrong.
That's
So
right.
30
Yeah.
years later, the science reversed itself or did something different. Like I have a nice, wonderful collection of books you can read of scientists telling you how stupid religion was. The religion's still here, the science is gone.
Well,
Um,
because yeah, but that happens on every area of life where
yeah,
they close themselves off, and
exactly.
that's why, and that's what I try to do with my channel and everything that I do is documenting or understanding change. And you have to have an open but critical mind. You can't just accept something without some kind of data behind it, right?
Exactly. It's
Because
a
that's
standard
just
of
as
proof.
dumb.
It's I'm
Yeah.
open to everything, but everything gets judged correctly. If you're just open-minded, you'll believe anything. So you
Yeah,
gotta,
yeah, you can't do that. But then you even look at history and you go, well, wait a minute. A lot of history is just written by whoever wants to be in power. And if you even like our maps, the way our maps were drawn out,
yeah,
were on purpose to make certain areas look bigger and on top of other areas.
yeah,
I mean, like it's infamous that the way they put the Europe on top and Africa on bottom was because they wanted to have that power dynamic. And then they also made Africa look smaller when in reality it's freaking massive.
yeah, enormous. Exactly. And I mean, those are a couple examples, but there's just everything had an agenda. Everything that was ever created, et cetera, was created by a human being, a flawed person who saw the world one way, and whether they expressly were trying to had an
That's right
express
too. Yeah.
purpose in mind, or they just culturally were blind. There's something going on in everything that you're dealing with, and you got to sort through all of that stuff. And that's, as I say, go back to the Bible and interpreting it. That's why I loved having 100 commentaries. Was you get 100 different views, you think you might be getting closer to the reality, but if you only read one or you only read a couple, you're only getting two tiny little perspectives on the question, not the full entire panoply.
Well, I think that's awesome,
Yeah.
and because you're using everything you possibly can. It would even create another dimension to get interpretations based on modern cultures
Yeah.
at the time. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Exactly. Yep.
but you can't. We don't have that, and so you got to go with whatever you have. But it's such a wonderful work of that. It's new, and so the other
Yeah.
thing is you've created something new,
Yeah.
which hopefully will broaden the conversation.
It's an odd thing because I didn't do anything. I just assembled it, but it is creative. Once you've assembled it, it now exists and it is a way for people to get access to the information they didn't have before. And like I said, my main thing, my book's been read by people of all different faiths and no faith, etc. Everyone has loved the book, nothing but five-star reviews. It is a simple evidentiary analysis as we just walk through it together. And, I have my opinions, but you're entitled to yours, and that's that. No one's been offended by it. Everyone's liked it. It's just, I wanted to know, what did everybody ever say about this? And I wanted to find out all the ways that Protestant scholars thought that these books were referred to in the Bible. And I assemble all that and I give it to people that. But here's the third thing. Those are my two prongs of my analysis. The third one, it's a minor piece of the 500 pages of evidence that I'm giving, but I bought the Jewish Study Bible. I wanted to know what the Jews say about these books. And it is amazing how many people don't realize what the Jews say. They're reading what Christians claim the Jews say versus what the Jews
Well,
say.
that's interesting too. And
Yeah.
that's included in your book.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm stealing it from the Jewish Study Bible. You could also buy that Bible and read it yourself. But the point is, most Christians are not actually reading what the Jews say about the Jews. They're reading what
That's
Christians say
right.
about the Jews. And, I just was curious, well, what do the Jews say about this? I mean, not that that's the answer or anything. It's just everyone should have that as a data point when you're thinking is what does the Jewish scholarship say?
Oh, this is excellent.
Yeah.
I mean, this is how we need to approach almost everything right now. And just having this kind of
Yeah.
approach maybe would solve a lot of our worldwide problems.
I think this every day, and I also remind myself it's never going to happen. But yeah,
I
exactly.
know.
Like
I
let's start
know. I'm working with
started
you.
at ground zero with no assumptions, investigate it and explore upwards. And in my case, as I say, it was just easy because I wasn't religious. So I came to this not believing anything. So it was fairly easy to, be open-minded and want to go pursue this. Again, maybe not easy. It took a retired lawyer with time and interest on his hands, but I did it in that spirit, because of my background. I feel almost like it was divinely inspired in a way. That's why God kept me alive, was so that somebody would be there to do this work for him and get it out there. But it's now that I've done it, I hope everybody will mooch off of it. Because as you say, isn't that really what we tell everyone to do on every major question? And
That's
here
right.
we are in one of the most fundamental questions of Christianity, and it doesn't seem like anybody did it. So.
That's awesome. Okay, where can they get a copy of your book?
So my website is Canon Crossfire, and it's Canon of Scripture. So it's Canon, not two N's in the middle there. CanonCrossfire.com. Uh, I have a free preview of the book for anybody who's interested. Links everywhere. There's, a Kindle version available on Amazon. I've actually also, there's an audio book, large print edition. I have friends who have trouble reading, etc. So I did everything I could to make it as accessible for people as possible.
Oh, this is awesome. Thank you so much. I
Oh, no
really
problem.
appreciate the conversation.
God bless. Thank you.